Okay, hi everybody. I hope this is working. I think this is working. This is Colleen. I'm filling in for Sabrina today to do our WDC Facebook Live for this week and talk about southern resident orcas. All right, I got the confirmation. We're live. Okay, sorry for being a little bit late today, everybody. Of course, we had some technical difficulties. My computer decided it needed to restart and do some updates at like 11:50. I'm on the West Coast, so it's noon my time. So really horrible timing for, for that update, but we're good, we're here. We're gonna talk about southern resident orcas today and the current action alert we have for them. We'll give people some time to join since we did start a little bit late. Again, I apologize. We really appreciate the patience that everybody has had with us as we've tried to figure out how all of this works and doing this, this online live stream stuff. It's new to us, we're figuring it out, but we're getting better. We appreciate everybody joining us and tuning in and bearing with us as we're getting all of this sorted. So if you're just starting to tune in, you get me today. I'm Colleen Weiler. I'm the Jessica Rekos Fellow for Orca Conservation with WDC. And I am over on the West Coast. So I've got a little bit of a leg up on my coworkers and working remotely and working from home, because that's what I do anyway. So if you guys need any work from home tips, let me know. Happy to share my experience. And it's really nice to be over here on the West Coast and work on orca conservation because this is where the orcas are. So it's pretty helpful to actually be here and to be in the region and be really tapped in and tuned in to everything that is going on in our area. So we are going to talk about southern residents today, our favorite orca species, or orca population, because orcas are all one species technically. We'll get into that though. And we're going to talk about the action alert that we currently have going for southern resident orcas. So see, we've got some reactions, we've got some people. So we might as well jump in and get started. Again, thanks everyone for being here. Hopefully all of the screen stuff works okay too. I think there might be a little bit of a delay for the stream itself because again, technical issues, but we'll figure it out. So to reintroduce myself, Colleen Weiler, I have the honor of being the Jessica Rekos Fellow for WDC. And I've been in that position for about 6 years now. So I have been dedicated to working on southern resident orca recovery here where I live in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of that has to do with policy work. So I head up our orca policy stuff over here and giving the southern residents what they need to survive and to recover. So first, we're going to talk about today, who are the southern resident orcas? What are we talking about when we say this name? Why are they endangered? Why do they need our help? And then pivoting over to our current action alert for them, what's the deal with the dams? Why is a whale organization talking about dams and rivers and all of that stuff that seems like it's not really connected to whales, but is actually a really big deal for the southern resident population? And Sabrina kind of covered this in one of her earlier live streams, but I wanted to provide a little bit more detail because you're going to hear us say orca and use that term. And this is a species that everyone else might know better as a killer whale. So I wanted to give a little more information about why we say orca instead of saying killer whale. So it all goes back to way back in the day. The original whalers that would leave their coastal areas and go out to sea to actually hunt whales would see these big black and white creatures that were hunting the same whales that they were going after. So they called them Baleanas assassinas, which flips around into the English translation of killer whale. Now, in my opinion, that's pretty reductive. It just talks about one aspect of these really charismatic and intelligent and remarkable creatures by just recognizing their role as a top predator in the ecosystem. So only talking about one aspect of someone's personality really isn't fair, right? Their scientific name, Orcinus orca, sounds better, but the meaning actually is not that much better. So Orcinus comes from Orcas. Little tea break with my nice whale mug, which means the Roman god of the underworlds. And then orc or orca, excuse me, is a Latin term that means a jar or a cask, and is also Greek for whale or dolphin, because a whale or dolphin is nice and round like a jar or a cask. So Orcinus orca pretty much means whale belonging to the god of the underworld. So also not a great term, but a pretty straightforward orca basically just means whale or dolphin. So it can be a lot more encompassing of everything that goes into orcas and who they are and what they're all about. So we like that term. We're going to stick with that one. And orcas as a species, again, they're considered one species worldwide, and they are very cosmopolitan. You can find orcas in every ocean in the world. They're more common and more abundant in some areas, but you will have orcas down around cold water, Antarctica, up in the Arctic. You have orcas in tropical waters, the Gulf of Mexico, around Hawaii, and then of course here in the Pacific Northwest where I live. And even over in the Atlantic, they get occasional sightings around Massachusetts where WDC headquarters is. So anywhere you go, pretty good chance there's an orca around you. But even though they are considered one species worldwide, thanks to really ongoing and fantastic research programs, we do know that these different types, we call them ecotypes of orcas, actually exist. There's at least 10 that we know of. There are probably more, but more information is needed to really make that determination. I mean, you can see in this picture, they're all black and white. They all have that iconic, distinctive orca coloration, but it's all a little bit different. Those patterns of black and white kind of vary between these types of orcas. They're all very social, but they live in different social groupings. And then these different ecotypes have different behaviors, different dialects, they communicate differently. And the biggest and most important difference is that they are genetically distinct from each other. So these ecotypes don't intermix with each other, and they actually very rarely even interact. So even though they might live in the same area and their habitat range might overlap, these orcas are using their environment very differently and really kind of going out of their way to avoid each other. So these different populations and different types pretty much stay contained within themselves. They really don't like to mix it up with other orcas. And one of the biggest distinctions between these different ecotypes, just like for people, is based on food. So for us, food is really connected to our cultures and our regions. We have family recipes that are passed down. If you grew up in a certain area, you have a favorite local cuisine or something that is really identified with your region. I don't know that food stands for Oregon really count as a cuisine, but I guess it's, it's a way of getting food or of eating. Massachusetts, I guess over there, Portuguese is really popular. So if you go online and you just look for different food maps, you can find a wide variety of representations. This one I just thought was really interesting and really connects to orcas very similarly, having these really distinct differences in food and in what they eat. So as a species, orcas eat over 140 different types of food. They eat fish, they eat other marine mammals, they eat squid, they eat turtles. Some of them even eat birds. But each ecotype and even different populations within those ecotypes has a very specific type of food that they specialize on. And they really don't go off menu. Orcas are very picky eaters. So if you have a favorite food and you like to eat that most of the time, For me, growing up, it was pretty much anything cheese related, mac and cheese, grilled cheese, pizza. If I had cheese, I was happy. I've branched out a little bit as an adult, but for orcas, they get their favorite food and they stick with it. And all of that information, what to eat, what's safe to eat, and then hunting techniques, how to get that food, is information that's passed down from older members of a community to the younger members. So it's something that's learned and it's information that is shared in these very distinct ecotypes and populations. So orcas are actually one of the best examples of culture and of learning outside of human communities, which is pretty cool. And all of this ability to distinguish between ecotypes really started in the Pacific Northwest here with the 3 different types that we have. The residents are one of them. We're going to talk about them a little bit more. And then we have 2 others that live in this area. Way back in the 1970s with Michael Bigg, who's really the godfather of orca research. He kind of started all of this when he figured out that you could identify different types of orcas and different individuals within those types. So everything really started here. And then thanks to this long-term monitoring that we have from really great organizations like the Center for Whale Research up in Washington and our partners at Orca Lab in British Columbia, they've been able to track these different populations and different family groups over time. So they can figure out births and deaths in a group. Once you can identify individuals, you know who they're spending time with, what they're eating, where they're going, how long they're in certain areas. So you can get so much information about these different populations just by being able to identify and follow specific individuals of orcas. So this is a family tree, and you can see the relationships and births and new calves, and just, you know, looks just like a family tree that you might put together on a genealogy website or tracking your family history. Similar thing for the orcas. And Monica talked about this a little bit in her presentation and her WDC live stream on identifying whales and how you can identify and name humpback whales and tell different individuals in different species of whales. So for orcas, it's that big, tall dorsal fin that they have on their back. You get up to 6 feet tall in the males and then a little bit smaller, about 2.5 feet in females. And then that patch of white that's on their back right behind the dorsal fin, which is called the saddle patch. And each shape and size and pattern of that dorsal fin, some of them have nicks and scratches or scars. And then the pigmentation pattern of that saddle patch is consistent over time. So you can identify individuals and know who's who and follow them throughout their entire life. All right, so we're going to focus in on the resident ecotype today because those are our favorite southern residents. And the scientists who determined that residents were a specific ecotype named them resident because of the way that they lived. So they live in incredibly closely bonded family groups. Both males and females will stay with their mom for her entire life. They are a matriarchal society, which means that the moms and the grandmothers are in charge. And for you guys hanging out at home right now, you might be figuring out who's the boss in your household. So might be the mom, might be the grandma, but for orcas, it's definitely grandma. She's the one in charge. And then as fish eaters, the residents specialize on fish. That is their diet. That's what they eat. Salmon happens to be their favorite food. So they have a pretty abundant and available food source, and they would stay in one area for a long period of time, kind of like just hanging out at the buffet and snacking on what's available there. So big family groups, one area for a long period of time. So they were the resident orcas because they just kind of hung out and stayed in one place. And then we have these distinct and unique populations within this resident ecotype that is based on pretty much where they live in relation to each other. So Alaskan residents, obviously up by Alaska, that name's pretty straightforward. The northern residents, which are kind of off the coast of British Columbia, And then the southern residents, the southernmost population of resident ecotype of orcas, are down around from essentially Vancouver Island down to Monterey, California. So the southernmost population. Very creative with the naming. And they are currently the only endangered population of orcas in the US. So the northern resident population, their cousins to the north, and the southern residents are both considered endangered in Canada, but the southern residents are the only ones listed in the United States. And as I said, they are fish eaters. That is their favorite food. That's what they eat. And most of that is salmon, and specifically Chinook salmon. So we have, I could do a whole nother live stream just on salmon, but for today, we'll just stick with our Chinook description. We have 5 different species of salmon that actually live in waters here in the Northwest. And Chinook is the largest and the fattiest. So it is the swimming hamburger of the ocean, definitely the most valuable and worthwhile for the orcas. And unfortunately right now, also the least abundant and the least available at this time. In the summertime, when we have the most information available about what the orcas are eating, up to 80% of their diet is Chinook. So if I ate mac and cheese, you know, 4 or 5 days a week, that's a lot of mac and cheese, but I think that I probably wouldn't get sick of it. I'm pretty happy with mac and cheese. And that's basically the orcas are eating Chinook a lot of the time. In the fall and winter, they might add a little bit other different types of fish into their diet, but Chinook and other types of salmon are still #1 on the list. So they're very, very dependent on Chinook and food and prey availability. And right now there's only 73 and possibly 72 southern resident orcas left in the wild population. There is 1 adult male who's missing at the moment. The last time his family group was seen by the Center for Whale Research, he wasn't seen with them, but that was only 1 sighting, so they're still waiting to confirm because sometimes they can be spread out over a large area and researchers might not see the entire family group, but typically if you see a group of orcas and 1 is missing, it's not good news. So we're waiting for confirmation. And hopefully he shows up, but at the moment, their population number is pretty low. So the southern residents have 3 pods or related family groups within the bigger community. They are J, K, and L. So for resident orcas, they're given alphanumeric names or designations. So the pods go by alphabet. Southern residents are J, K, and L. Northern residents have other letters in the alphabet. And then individuals have numbers. So you might see us refer to J56, who is the newest calf in the southern resident population. She's a member of J pod, and then she's the 56th orca of J pod to be counted in this ongoing census and study of their population. So she's J56. And then she also gets a nickname, and hers happens to be Tofino, named after the island where she was first spotted. So they do get a nickname from us, so we don't have to stick to that very scientific way of referring to them. And the range for the southern residents is pretty much from Southeast Alaska down to Monterey, California, but they spend most of their time either in the Salish Sea, which is that body of water between British Columbia, Washington, and the Vancouver Island. They like to hang out there in the summer and in the fall. And then they go out to the coastal waters off of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California in the winter and the spring. And they're following salmon coming back to these big rivers and watersheds all along the West Coast. So the timing of where they're going really has a lot to do with when and where salmon are available for food. All right, so how did we get to this point? Why are the southern residents endangered? So it started way back in the 1960s and 70s when the marine park industry was really getting up and running. And at that time, if you were building an aquarium and you wanted to have an orca in it, the Pacific Northwest was the place to go to find one. And in this 15-year period, up to 307 orcas were captured at one point in time. So they were rounded up, herded into coves and bays, and penned off. And then they were sorted through, and the best ones were picked out to be sent to these marine parks. A very heartbreaking and tragic and upsetting time, to be sure. And unfortunately, the Southern residents were disproportionately impacted by these efforts because of the nature of their population and their name. So going back a little bit, if you guys remember why they're called the Southern residents, they are resident orcas. They're the resident ecotype. So they're these big family groups that are all together and tend to stay in one area for a long period of time. And they're Southern. They're the southernmost population of this specific type of orca. So they happen to overlap with a lot of human population centers and big ports, and boats, and areas that could send these captors out to round up orcas. So unfortunately, by the virtue of where they were living and how they live, the Southern residents were really heavily impacted by this time. And at least 47 of the orcas that were eventually taken and sold to marine parks were from the Southern resident population, which was a significant part of their community at that time. And if you'll remember a couple slides ago, I said there are 73 or 72 left in the wild population. And we always make that distinction because there is still one Southern resident orca who survived this really scary time held in captivity. And that's Tokate, or Lolita, who is held at the Miami Seaquarium. And she is a Southern resident orca, but she is unfortunately not part of the wild population because she is still held by the Seaquarium. And again, that's another webinar that we could schedule and share her story and talk about her and the efforts to retire her from captivity and to bring her home. But for now, we'll just make that note that unfortunately, she has been held for a really long time. So that initial huge impact to the population is what, initially brought them down to really low numbers. And then at the same time that these captures were happening, all of these really big changes were happening in their home. Salmon started to really decline over the last, well, pretty much since the 1900s, but especially in the last 50 or 60 years. Contaminants and pollution started increasing, and we started using the ocean a lot more with shipping and construction and naval activity, making it a really noisy place. So anyone that's been working from home recently, if you've been trying to have a conference call or a Zoom and someone outside your window starts up a lawnmower or some power tools, it can get a little bit stressful and a little bit annoying. And that's what it's like for whales and dolphins too, out in the water with a lot of human-made noise. It's just a lot of, they have to struggle more to hear each other and to navigate and to find food. Their stress levels can increase in really noisy areas. So same impact for whales and dolphins as someone running a lawnmower outside your window all the time. So they were already at this really low population level, and all of these big changes started happening that made it really hard for them to bounce back from the impacts of that really heartbreaking time of live captures. And really the biggest threat to them is that they don't have enough to eat. So salmon have declined throughout their range. And these orcas really rely on salmon from different rivers throughout the year. When they're up in the Salish Sea in the summertime, they're eating salmon coming back to rivers in British Columbia and in Washington. They come down off the coast, and the timing of their movements corresponds to when salmon are coming back to these rivers. So the orcas know when and where to go to find sources of food, but there just hasn't been enough food for them in recent years to make them healthy. So without enough to eat, the whales really struggle. They are more susceptible to getting sick. They're not able to have healthy calves and help grow the population. And then it kind of compounds the impacts of these other threats like pollution and noise and stress. So getting them to have enough to eat is really our top goal in their recovery, and something that we work on a lot is making sure we're working on salmon recovery and getting the orcas food. So for a whale person, I do a lot of work on salmon recovery, which is a whole new world for me, but I've definitely learned a lot about salmon in the last 6 years. And I want to talk a little bit about why Chinook salmon in particular are so important and why salmon have declined. So, what is causing this? What is causing it there to not be enough food available for the whales? So Chinook salmon, again, largest and fattiest type of salmon. They are the Cliff Bars or the hamburgers of the ocean. So they're very valuable for the whales. And they're generally available year round. So salmon have this migration pattern of they're born in rivers, they leave and they grow up in the ocean. They spend anywhere from 1 to 7 years at sea. And they can distribute all over the place in the ocean. Some of them stay close to home. They stay in the area around that river. Some of them go all the way up to the Gulf of Alaska or way out to sea. And they grow up, get nice and big, and turn into nice, good, fatty orca snacks. And then they come back and they return to those rivers where they were born. And it's on that return trip when they're the biggest and the fattiest and the most nutritious that they can be that they're great orca food. And that's why the southern residents hang out around the mouths of these rivers, because they're waiting for those big, giant, fatty salmon to come back. And they come back at different times of the year. So they're typically available to the orcas at all times, but in different parts of their range. But unfortunately, a lot of the same things that have affected the orcas have also affected salmon. So they have had to deal with losing habitat through development and construction, barriers on rivers that are literal barriers to them migrating either out or back up rivers. Kind of like if you're walking to the grocery store and you either have a nice, clear, empty road to get there, or there's an obstacle course between you and the store. It's a lot harder to go through that obstacle course than it is to go down just a nice, straight, empty street. Pollution, overharvest, and a lot of other things impact salmon, but a lot of it has to do with not having good habitat and those barriers, dams and levees, and anything that interrupts their migration in and out of rivers. So we have been advocating for addressing those issues, improving salmon habitat, getting more restoration and recovery, and then taking down some of these really big and significant barriers that harm their migration. And that brings us to the Snake River dams. Yay! Policy time. So the Snake River is a tributary of the Columbia River, which used to be the biggest salmon producing watershed in the Pacific Northwest. It had up to 16 million salmon coming back every year to the Columbia, and about half of those were headed up to the Snake River. Now, the Snake River dams, which were built in the 60s and 70s, were controversial even before they were created. People knew what the impacts would be on these big salmon populations and how it would change just the ecology and the way that the river acted as a natural river. But they were seen as necessary to help the economic growth and development of the Northwest. But again, pretty much since they were created, there have been people working on salmon recovery and working on river restoration who have argued that they can be removed and the services replaced with hopefully a minimal impact on communities in the region. And as we've learned more about the southern resident orcas and what they eat and where they go and what they need at different times of the year to survive, we've learned that Snake River and Columbia Basin salmon are really, really important for these whales in the winter and in the early springtime. They spend a ton of time outside the Columbia River, and Chinook coming back to this area is a really big part of their diet when they're in coastal waters. So they really need more of this salmon to be able to just survive and to have healthy calves and help the population recover. So right now, these dams are undergoing a review by federal agencies, and they have to consider the impacts of the dams, different plans for managing them into the future, and how they balance all of these different things like wildlife and salmon recovery and the environment and ecosystem and the economics and industry of this area. So this is where we come in, because the federal agencies have released a report that covers everything that they looked at and considered in managing these dams. And they left out a lot of stuff about the southern resident orcas. They're barely mentioned in this report. They completely ignore how important these salmon are to the orcas. And they made a decision for management that really doesn't do a whole lot to help salmon recover or to help orcas recover. And so this is where you guys come in too. So we currently have an action alert running, and someone will post the link in the comments. I'll get to those in a little bit and answer any questions that you guys have. But the good thing about this process is that these federal agencies listen to you guys. So all of these decisions that are made come with the opportunity for the public to weigh in and share your thoughts and your opinions and what you want to see happen. So we need all of you guys, everybody, to speak up for the southern resident orcas and for salmon, and for a solution that helps this entire region to have good and healthy runs of salmon and help southern resident orcas recover. So these agencies, they're going to listen to you. They have to take your input into consideration. We're working with partners on writing some pretty technical and detailed comments going through all of the science that they left out. But we need you guys to add your voices and speak up for southern residents and tell them that you're paying attention and that you care and that you want to see them do more to help southern residents and to help salmon recover. Because we want to get the southern residents their snacks. We want to make sure they are not going hangry, that they have enough to eat to keep them healthy and thriving and to get that population number up from 72. So we want to see that. We want to see that grow. Okay, so that is policy portion of our talk today and a little bit of info on the southern resident orcas. I am gonna stop sharing. Okay, it's me now. And check on our comments and see if we have any questions and anything that you guys want to know about southern resident orcas. We covered a lot today. There's so much we could say about this population for sure. We could do a whole other webinar on matriarchs and how important the grandmothers are and how they help the survival of their offspring and their grand offspring and just help the whole community. So if you guys have anything that you'd like us to talk about or like to see in a future webinar, let us know in the comments. Sign our action alert and our petition and help us help southern residents. And then anything that we can't get to in the comments right now, we will definitely answer in the future. And then this webinar will be recorded and available in the future. And we really hope to keep doing these with you guys as we're all adapting to life at home and new ways of connecting and talking about whales and dolphins. Will we be doing more live videos? Yes, we will. So there's going to be one coming up on Thursday at the same time at 3 p.m. Eastern or noon Pacific. And if you have any burning questions about whales or dolphins or topics that you'd like to see us discuss, let us know. We'd love to take your ideas. We want to share as much information as possible. So I know it's been definitely a crazy time in the world, and there's a lot going on, and people have a lot of other things to be worried about, but all of this policy stuff is still going on too. So we're still keeping an eye on it, and we're still hard at work to make sure that we're doing our job of protecting whales and dolphins and tracking what's going on. So there will be new topics coming out on Sunday of every week. We'll post what's coming up for the week, so you can keep an eye on that. And how many calves have been born among the 3 pods in the last 10 years? All right, I don't know the 10-year number off the top of my head, but I can tell you that there have been 2 calves that were born last year. There was one born at the very end of 2018 into L pod, and one born in May of 2019 in J pod. That was J56. And they were the first 2 calves to be observed and to live more than a short period of time since November of 2015. So they went a really long time and a really scary time without having new babies. And there has been science that's come out on the nutritional status of the whales, and that they are unfortunately losing almost 70% of their pregnancies because they don't have enough to eat. So they really need nice, good, abundant salmon runs to help them have healthy calves and healthy offspring. So the calves are very important, obviously for population recovery, and then salmon are important for having healthy moms. We have a question about how the whale sanctuaries are coming along. So WDC helps with the Sea Life Trust Beluga Sanctuary in Iceland. I actually don't know an update on that off the top of my head, but we will answer that in the comments later when we can get that information from our partners over in the UK. And Sabrina is letting me know that on Thursday, we're going to be talking about whale poop. So fantastic topic, one of my favorites. You can learn about how important whale poop is for everybody. We're very lucky to have fantastic, we have a good research friends at Conservation Canines, which is an organization that uses dogs to help sniff out the poop of endangered species. And they have a program with southern resident orcas where they have dogs, Conservation Canine EBA, who helps to sniff out orca poop, and they collect that from the water. And it's an amazing non-invasive way to get all kinds of information about the orcas. They can look at pregnancy hormones and status, nutritional status, you know, if they've been eating something really, really good recently, if they haven't been, looking at different levels of toxics. So you can learn a lot from orca poop, and then orca poop and other whale poop is also really important for ecosystem health. All right, so again, we do have another talk on Thursday, same time, same place. We don't have a lot of other questions coming in, so I think I'm going to sign off and let you guys all get back to your day. But thanks again for tuning in and for watching and being patient and bearing with us during technical issues. We will get this figured out. It was my first time doing a live stream today, so we were a little bit late just because I had to get everything figured out for me. But if I see you guys again in the future, then we'll have it all figured out. But don't forget to go sign our action alert, support Southern Resident Orca Recovery, and join us again on Thursday. And we'll call it good. So thanks everybody. Stay safe, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and wash your hands. And now I have to figure out how to stop this live stream. So thanks again all, and we'll see you Thursday.